Dr. Aslam, why are fibers important?
Fiber is the part of our plant-based diet that human beings cannot digest. Fiber used to make a very significant part of human diet. Over the course of the millennia that we have evolved, it has been taken out of our diet progressively in the past, more so in the past century. So, what do fibers do? Fibers are very useful, very important in maintaining the motility of our intestinal tract. Fibers are very important in keeping the healthy bacteria in our intestine alive and kicking. And fibers are very important for regulating the rate of absorption of what we eat. There are two basic types of fibers. One, what are called soluble, and one, what are called insoluble. So, soluble fibers are the fibers that dissolve in water and make a sticky, sort of glue like paste. And insoluble fibers are the fibers that absorb water and swell up, like chia seeds. So, when we have diet that is rich in fiber, a couple of things can happen. Earlier, we said that fibers cannot be digested by human body. So, when we eat fiber, they take up space in our stomach and it leaves less room to eat non-fiber parts of our diet. So essentially, we eat less of the part of our we eat less of what can be digested by the body. Second, let's suppose we are taking, you eat a piece of cake, but you eat it with fiber. So what's going to happen is, number one, you will have, you would eat less because the fiber will take up space in your stomach. So you'll eat less. Then the soluble part, the gluey part of the fiber is going to, when we eat anything, like, for instance, when you eat a piece of cake, it gets in our stomach and the stomach churns it, breaks it down into small particles. So now the gluey part of the fiber is going to coat each particle. You know that food needs to be broken down before it can get absorbed. So, for instance, when we talk about carbohydrates, sugars, they have to be broken down by an enzyme called amylase. And we all know that enzyme means a catalyst. Biological catalyst is called an enzyme. So, these enzymes need to work on the sugar molecules to break them down to the point where they can be absorbed. When these particles are coated by the soluble gluey fiber, enzyme cannot work on it. So less of what you would eat, less of the sugars, for instance, that you would eat would actually get broken down and absorbed. Second thing, insoluble fiber is going to absorb water and it would form bulk. So for instance, carbohydrates, sugars that you would eat would actually get trapped in that bulk and will get absorbed slowly as they pass through your intestine. One of the big problem is when we eat processed food, processed sugar-rich food, as soon as the sugar gets in our body, it gets absorbed. As soon as it gets absorbed, it spikes in our bloodstream. This spike then stimulates corresponding increase in insulin. So in a very short period of time, you get a lot of sugar and a lot of insulin secondary to the sugar. Now this insulin starts to, it sees that there is just too much sugar around for us to be able to use for energy in the very short time that it gets absorbed. So it gets stored as glycogen and as fat. When you eat the same amount of sugar, for instance, along with a decent healthy amount of fiber, the rate of absorption slows down because of what I mentioned earlier. The rate of absorption slows down, so that spike never happens. When the blood sugar spike doesn't happen, the insulin spike doesn't happen. So that is one very important thing that the fibers do. Second, as I said earlier, fibers stimulate. So our intestine moves food by what are called peristaltic movements. These are wave-like movements that go through our intestine and move the food through. Now, Our intestine has what are called smooth muscles. They need to be stretched to create a healthy peristaltic wave. When the food has no bulk, the peristaltic waves are weak. When you have fiber that gives it that bulk, the peristaltic waves are much healthier, and they move the food at a predictable, good rate. So people who suffer from constipation, it improves their constipation. People who suffer from diarrhea, it improves their diarrhea. So the second part is good, healthy, regular bowel movements. Third thing that is very important is we cannot digest fibers. They're not food for us. But fibers are food for the healthy bacteria that live in our intestine. The only thing they can eat is these fibers. And when we start eliminating fibers from our diet, these bacteria don't get their food and their colonies become unhealthy. Because of unhealthy bacteria, another condition starts to develop. It's called leaky gut syndrome. What that means is our intestine, the inner wall of the intestine, for instance, creates a very healthy, robust barrier between the food that we have in the lumen of the intestine and our body and our bloodstream. Now this barrier is maintained by very closely packed cells in the inner lining of the gut. Leaky gut happens when this lining starts to break down. Because of this breakdown, bacteria, our food is laden with bacteria, right? So this bacteria starts to go through the intestine into our bloodstream. Now what happens is our immune system, and gut is one of the major sort of seats of our immune system. So our immune system has to start blocking this bacteria that is coming at a very high rate. Overall immune system starts going in hyperdrive. So on one hand, they try to kind of, keep the bacteria away, but at the same time, because they're in hyperdrive, for people who are vulnerable, it can precipitate autoimmune disorders. And for people who already have autoimmune disorders, it can make it worse. So fibers actually improve the health of our gut bacteria, healthy gut bacteria. This healthy gut bacteria improves the leaky gut syndrome, which in turn allows our immune system to function normally. There is another very important thing that healthy bacteria do, which is they keep the unhealthy bacteria in check. Folks who have been either hospitalized or their relatives have been hospitalized may have heard of, for instance, C. diff, unhealthy bacteria in the gut that starts to overgrow. It can happen if you take antibiotics, for instance, and certain other conditions. So healthy bacteria keep unhealthy bacteria at bay. It maintains the health of the intestinal lining, which stops too much too many bacteria getting into the bloodstream, which allows the immune system to start functioning normally. When there is too much of sort of immune activity, it causes inflammation. These days, we have heard of people having sort of too much inflammation in the body. This is one of the ways that it happens. So bacteria gets in the bloodstream, immune cells come in, they try to kind of contain that bacteria, kill it. So they may be able to do it, but in that process, the fight between the immune cells and the bacteria causes damage to the adjacent healthy cells also, which is essentially what inflammation is. So fiber reduces inflammation by reducing the bacterial load that is going in our system.